Imagine someone hands you a map of an entire continent, a landmass bigger than the continental United States, bigger than all of Western Europe combined, and draws one tiny dot on it. That dot represents where almost the entire population lives. Everything outside that dot, silent, empty, uninhabited, that country is Australia. And here is the fact that should genuinely stop you. 95% of that land, millions upon millions of square kilometers, holds almost no permanent human presence at all. No cities, no highways, no farms stretching to the horizon. In some regions, not a single human footprint for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Now here's the question. Australia is one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. Stable democracy, world-class infrastructure, enormous natural resources. English-speaking, one of the highest standards of living anywhere on the planet. So why would a country like that leave 95% of its own territory completely, almost defiantly, untouched? Is it choice, economics, fear, or is it something far older, far bigger, and far more humbling than any of those answers? Stay with me, because what you are about to discover will not just change the way you see Australia, it will change the way you see land, civilization, and the future of human survival on this planet. This is the story of a continent that broke every rule of how civilization is supposed to work, and why the land itself is entirely responsible. This is not a story about failure. This is a story about a force far more powerful than ambition, and it is one of the most important geographical truths of the modern world. On the surface, Australia looks like a dream destination for civilization itself. It consistently ranks in the global top 10 for human development, personal freedom, education, and quality of life. Its economy famously went 28 consecutive years without a recession. Its universities are world-class, its healthcare excellent, its government stable enough that the biggest annual political controversy usually involves cricket. So open a satellite map of Australia at night and look carefully. You will see light, yes, but almost all of it is crammed into a thin, curved strip hugging the southeastern coastline. Sydney, Melbourne just below, Brisbane to the north, Adelaide further along, and Perth isolated like a forgotten lamp on the far western edge. Then, covering the overwhelming majority of the continent, darkness, vast, total continent-swallowing darkness. This is not normal. Europe at night is a galaxy of continuous light. The eastern United States blazes from Boston to Miami without interruption. China, India, Brazil, all show human habitation spread broadly across their landmasses. Australia has roughly 3 people per square kilometer. Bangladesh packs over 1,100. The Netherlands, 500. Even Canada, famous for its frozen, empty wilderness, has a higher density in its populated zones. And yet Australia is not poor, not unstable, not struggling. Most tourists never ask this question. They fly into Sydney, see the Opera House, visit Uluru, and fly home thinking they have seen Australia. They have not even scratched the surface, literally. The real Australia, the ancient, vast, and different Australia, begins exactly where the city lights end, and it does not stop for thousands of kilometers in any direction. It is a silence so complete and so vast that you could lose entire European nations inside it and never hear them land. Here is the truth. Simple on the surface, staggering in its implications. Australia is, without exaggeration, one of the most hostile environments on Earth for sustained large-scale human habitation. Not because of its famous dangerous animals, not because of political instability or disease, but because of one single, overwhelming, non-negotiable geographic reality. The interior of Australia is one of the largest, most brutally arid zones of land anywhere on this planet. But it is not heat and drought alone. It is the terrible combination arriving together without mercy, year after year. No reliable surface water, no fertile soil. Australian interior soils are among the most ancient and nutrient-depleted on Earth, leached bare by hundreds of millions of years of weathering. No connectivity. The nearest town to many outback locations is several hundred kilometers away across largely roadless terrain. And layered on top, cyclones, flash floods, wildfires of incomprehensible scale, and dust storms the size of small countries. But in geological time, hundreds of millions of years, to understand why Australia became what it is, while other landmasses were continuously sculpted, thrust into mountain ranges by colliding tectonic plates, refreshed by volcanic eruptions spreading rich minerals across the surface, carved by glaciers depositing nutrient-dense sediment across vast plains. Australia has been sitting quietly, ancient and largely unchanged, for an extraordinarily long time. And that geological age is the key to everything. When land is young and geologically active, it tends to be fertile. Volcanic soil is among the richest on Earth. Mountain erosion brings fresh minerals to valleys. Glacial activity pulverizes rock into fine, mineral-rich dust that blankets the landscape like natural fertilizer. Young, dynamic landscapes support dense ecosystems and eventually dense human populations. Australia had almost none of that regeneration across its vast interior. The continent has been flat, dry, and dormant for so long that its soils have been exhausted simply by time itself. The nutrients leached away eons ago. What remains is a landscape of profound, terrible antiquity. Beautiful in its way, but nearly useless for agriculture at any meaningful scale. Now add the climate. Australia sits in a band of latitude, roughly 20 to 35 degrees south, that globally produces desert conditions almost everywhere. The same band that gives us the Sahara, the Arabian Desert, the Namib, and the Atacama. Earth's atmospheric circulation creates zones of persistently dry, descending air at these latitudes, and descending air suppresses rainfall with ruthless efficiency. And because Australia has no significant mountain ranges crossing its interior to force moist ocean air upward and release rainfall inland, whatever moisture does reach the continent mostly falls on the narrow coastal fringes and stops dead. The Aboriginal Australians understood all of this through 65,000 years of lived experience, the longest continuous cultural history of any people on Earth. They never attempted to build dense inland cities not because they lacked intelligence or ambition, but because they possessed something rare and extraordinarily valuable, a deep, earned, granular understanding of exactly what the land could support and what it absolutely could not. That knowledge, accumulated across 65,000 years of careful observation and experience, is arguably the most sophisticated body of geographical intelligence ever developed by any people anywhere on Earth. Here is the central idea that ties everything together, and it is more profound than it first appears. Australia is not an exception to the rules of civilization. It is the clearest illustration of those rules that exists anywhere on this planet. Look at the entire sweep of human history. Every great civilization, without a single exception, has followed one pattern above all others. It follows water. The Nile River created Egypt. The Tigris and Euphrates created Mesopotamia, the birthplace of writing, law, and urban life itself. The Indus created the Harappan civilization. The Yellow River built the foundations of China. The Mississippi enabled North America's agricultural heartland. The great rivers of Europe threaded through every major empire. Every golden age of art, science, philosophy, and trade grew along a reliable water source that made agriculture possible, sustained large populations, and generated the food surplus that freed some people from farming to become craftsmen, soldiers, philosophers, and builders of cities. Australia's interior has none of that. And so civilization, almost as inevitably as water runs downhill, could not go there. It is not a failure of will, investment, or imagination. It is geography enforcing its ancient, immovable rules with absolute consistency. The thin crescent of population along Australia's southeastern coast exists precisely because that is where adequate rainfall occurs, where rivers run with some reliability, and where temperate conditions allow comfortable year-round living. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Canberra all sit within that narrow strip. Perth occupies its own isolated fertile pocket on the western coast. The other 95%? The land has spoken, consistently and without ambiguity, across millions of years. Not here, not at this scale, not without something changing at a fundamental level. That message has never changed, and civilization, for all its extraordinary cleverness and all its remarkable technology, has never found a convincing way to argue back. The land simply does not accept the argument. It does not even acknowledge that the argument is being made. Let us get specific, because the mechanics reveal just how precisely the land enforces its limits. Start with water. The Murray-Darling Basin in southeastern Australia is the continent's most important river system. The closest thing Australia has to an agricultural heartland. It covers roughly 1/7 of the continent and produces the vast majority of Australia's food. But even this system, Australia's agricultural crown jewel, is fragile in ways that are almost frightening. During the Millennium Drought, which ran from the late 1990s until 2009, the Murray-Darling came dangerously close to complete ecological collapse. Towns ran critically short of drinking water. Thousands of farms were abandoned, industries were devastated, and the Murray-Darling Basin is within the livable 5%. Now, try imagining agriculture where there is essentially no river system at all. Temperature next. The town of Marble Bar in remote Western Australia holds a world record, the longest consecutive stretch of days above 37.8 degrees Celsius ever officially recorded anywhere on Earth. 160 continuous days, more than 5 months of unrelenting heat. At those temperatures, outdoor work becomes medically dangerous within hours. Equipment fails, crops die. Animals require constant intervention to survive. The energy cost of keeping human beings alive becomes enormous. Then there's the tyranny of distance, a phrase Australians use with exhausted familiarity. The highway from Adelaide to Darwin covers nearly 3,000 kilometers of largely empty terrain. There are stretches of hundreds of kilometers with no fuel, no water, no phone signal, and no other human being in sight. Extending power grids, sealed roads, hospitals, and schools into such landscapes cost many times more per person served than in any densely populated region. The economics simply do not hold. And yet, some people do live out there. Aboriginal communities maintain a presence in many remote areas, often under conditions of extraordinary hardship. Vast cattle stations are managed by skeleton crews using helicopters and satellite technology. Remote mining operations extract iron ore, gold, and lithium from that ancient earth on fly-in, fly-out rosters. These people survive, often heroically, in conditions that would break most people within days. But surviving is profoundly different from thriving at civilizational scale. And it is civilizational scale. The dense, complex, interconnected kind of human life that builds cities and raises generations and creates lasting culture that the interior simply cannot support. The implications extend far beyond geography lessons. They shape Australia's economy, its national psychology, and its place in a rapidly changing global future. The economic paradox is remarkable. Australia is one of the world's largest exporters of iron ore, natural gas, coal, and gold. Its national wealth flows directly from that very interior that cannot sustain human settlement. The Pilbara region of Western Australia, one of the most hostile and remote landscapes on Earth, contains iron ore reserves so enormous that Australia ships more of it to Asia than almost any other country ships of any single commodity. Australia has become extraordinarily wealthy by extracting resources from land where humans cannot comfortably live. It is a civilization sitting around the edges of a vast geological vault it can mine and ship but never fully occupy. That is a genuinely strange and unique position in the history of nations. Climate change makes this more urgent, not less, because Australia already operates at the extreme edge of habitability across so much of its territory. Even modest climate shifts produce severe and visible consequences. The Black Summer bushfires of 2019 to 2020 burned approximately 19 million hectares, larger than the entire country of Syria, and killed an estimated 3 billion animals. Scientists are clear. As temperatures rise and rainfall patterns shift, Australia's uninhabitable zone will almost certainly expand. And there is something subtler that shapes Australian identity at a deep level. There is a psychological significance to knowing that beyond the suburban edge of your city, the land very quickly becomes something ancient, vast, and entirely indifferent to whether you live or die. Australians have a cultural directness, a lack of pretension, and easy acceptance of human limitations that observers from other countries frequently remark on. Some argue this quality is shaped, at least partly, by living in the permanent shadow of something so much larger, older, and more powerful than any human project. The Outback does not care about your ambitions. That knowledge, absorbed generation after generation, leaves a mark on a people. Now pull the camera to the widest possible view. Is Australia unique, or is it a warning the rest of the world has not yet learned to read? The answer is both. Australia is unique in the dramatic clarity with which its geography concentrates its population into such a small fraction of its territory. No other wealthy, developed nation presents the contrast quite so starkly, but the underlying principle, that civilization clusters where nature permits and retreats where nature forbids, is not Australian at all. It is universal. It is the oldest rule in the history of human settlement. Look at a global population density map with fresh eyes. The pattern repeats everywhere. People pile onto coastlines and riverbanks. They crowd into temperate zones. They spread across fertile plains where rainfall is reliable. And the vast interiors, the great world deserts, the frozen tundras, the impenetrable jungle hearts, remain sparsely inhabited or entirely empty. The Sahara covers over 9 million square kilometers and supports less than 1 person per square kilometer. Siberia, despite being part of a nuclear superpower with vast resources and enormous political will, is so empty that its population density barely registers on a global scale. The Amazon basin, despite its extraordinary biological richness, has never supported dense permanent settlement in its deep interior. Global no-go zones are not curiosities on the edges of human geography. They constitute a very large proportion of Earth's total land surface. And under current climate trajectories, here's the strategic question that governments, scientists, urban planners, and climate analysts are increasingly confronting. As the global population grows toward 9 or 10 billion people, and as climate change simultaneously destroys reliable agricultural land in multiple regions, simultaneously, where can humanity actually live, at scale, sustainably, with dignity? Australia's experience with desertification, water scarcity, and extreme weather is not a regional curiosity. It is a preview of what significant portions of the world may face within the lifetimes of people currently in school. Technology is beginning, slowly and partially, to push against the geographic limits that have defined Australia's story since the first humans arrived. Solar energy may be the single most transformative development. For the entire history of human settlement in Australia, the savage heat of the interior sun was a pure enemy. Now, for the first time, it can be converted into enormous quantities of electrical power. Australia's interior receives some of the highest solar irradiation recorded anywhere on Earth. There are already serious funded proposals, some in early construction, to build massive renewable energy generation zones across remote areas and export electricity through undersea cables to Indonesia, Singapore, and the broader Asian energy market. The Outback's hostility to human habitation may be on the verge of becoming its greatest competitive advantage. Autonomous technology is quietly reshaping the economics of remote industry. Self-driving ore trucks already operate in Pilbara mining regions without any human driver. Drone delivery systems are reducing the isolation of remote communities. Remote monitoring allows infrastructure to function with minimal on-site staff. Satellite internet has already transformed the day-to-day experience of outback life in ways unimaginable a decade ago. None of these technologies will fill the interior with cities. The geographic and climatic realities are simply too severe and too ancient to be overcome by anything currently foreseeable. But overcoming decades, they may support a larger and more sustainable human presence than has ever previously existed. More importantly, the next generation may come to see the vast uninhabited interior not as a failure to correct, but as a treasure to protect. In a world increasingly crowded, polluted, and overstimulated, a continent that kept 95% of itself wild, not through planning or foresight, but through the sheer insistence of the land itself, may come to be understood as one of the most remarkable and most fortunate accidents in human history. Here is what I want you to carry away from everything you have just heard. We live in an era that worships human achievement above almost everything. We celebrate what we have built and connected and conquered. We look at photographs of our cities taken from orbit, those brilliant, intricate webs of light across the dark surface of the Earth, and we feel pride in what our species has accomplished in just a few thousand years. But Australia's vast, dark, silent interior whispers something different to anyone willing to listen. It says, not everything can be conquered. The Earth has its own rules, written in geology and climate and the physics of water. It says, the map of where humans actually live is not a map of human achievement. It is a map of where the planet, on its own ancient terms, permits human life to exist at scale. The 95% of Australia that sits empty is not a failure of vision or investment or courage. It is not a wound in the national story. It is the land on its own terms, ancient beyond any human reckoning, immense beyond any human project, indifferent beyond any human emotion, standing as a permanent reminder that for all our civilization, all our cleverness, all our compulsive ambition, we are still guests here. Guests in a house we did not build, on a planet that operated for 4.5 billion years before the first human being drew a breath, and that will continue long after every city we have ever built has been quietly reclaimed by time. The next time you see Australia on a map, do not look only at the cities sparkling along that southeastern coast. Look at the darkness beyond them, that vast, quiet, incomprehensible space. That silence is not emptiness. That silence is the oldest truth the Earth knows how to tell. It was speaking long before the first city was built, long before the first map was drawn, long before anyone thought to ask why so much of this extraordinary continent sits empty and untouched. And it is still speaking now, to anyone humble enough, patient enough, and honest enough to stop and listen and finally understand.